Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. As the black and white images of breadlines, shuttered factories, and desperate faces fill the screen, a solemn voice cuts through the silence of the Great Depression era. In 1933, America stood on the brink of collapse. Over a quarter of the workforce was unemployed. Banks were failing by the thousands. Families lost their homes, farms, and faith in the future. The American dream had turned into a nightmare, and confidence in capitalism itself was shaken. Amid this despair, one figure emerged with a voice full of resolve and the promise of a New Deal. Franklin D. Roosevelt didn't just run for president, he offered salvation. His confident tone and sweeping rhetoric gave the people something they hadn't felt in years: hope. He promised action, experimentation, and a government that would no longer sit idle. But beneath the aura of heroic leadership lies a deeper, more complex reality. The New Deal is often remembered as the turning point that saved the country. But did it actually end the Depression? Or was its success more symbolic than substantive? Was it a bold economic rescue, or a myth built on selective memory and national pride? This story isn't just about programs and policies. It's about how a nation rebuilds its identity in the face of collapse. As we revisit one of the most dramatic chapters in American history, we ask the question, was the New Deal a true rescue, or a carefully constructed myth of American resilience? The story of the New Deal cannot be understood without first stepping into the grim reality of the Great Depression. It began with the 1929 stock market crash, a cataclysm that shattered investor confidence and triggered a financial panic. On October 29th, known forever as Black Tuesday, the market lost nearly 25% of its value in a single week, wiping out fortunes and eroding the backbone of the American economy. But the crash was only the beginning. Over the next 4 years, the economy spiraled into a downward vortex. By 1933, unemployment had soared to an unprecedented 25%, with nearly 13 million Americans out of work. Industrial production dropped by half, GDP shrank by more than 30%, and over 9,000 banks failed, evaporating life savings overnight. Soup kitchens and breadlines stretched down city blocks, while rural families lost their farms to foreclosure and faced starvation. The federal government's response under President Herbert Hoover was widely seen as too little, too late. Hoover believed in limited government intervention and placed his faith in voluntary cooperation between businesses and individuals. But as the crisis deepened, his restrained approach appeared hopelessly out of touch with the scale of the disaster. Public frustration mounted. Tent cities, mockingly dubbed Hoovervilles, sprang up across the country, a stark symbol of the administration's inability to provide relief. Roosevelt's emergence in 1932 was more than just the rise of a new political figure. It was the embodiment of a nation's desperate yearning for transformation. As Franklin D. Roosevelt took to the campaign trail, he wasn't just running against Herbert Hoover. He was challenging the very limits of what government was expected to do in a time of national emergency. Hoover's reliance on voluntarism and local solutions had failed to stem the tide of economic ruin, and for many Americans, it felt as if the government had abandoned them altogether. Into this void stepped Roosevelt with an audacious promise: the New Deal, a term deliberately vague but filled with hope. It signaled not just a set of policies, but a new contract between the government and the people, one where Washington would no longer stand idly by, but take a direct role in alleviating suffering, rebuilding the economy, and restoring public trust. Roosevelt's rhetoric of bold, persistent experimentation was radical for its time. He openly acknowledged that some policies might fail, but inaction, he insisted, was no longer an option. This pragmatic approach to governance resonated with a population tired of platitudes and paralyzed institutions. His landslide victory wasn't just about political alignment. It was a mandate for structural change. Americans weren't just electing a president. They were endorsing a shift in how democracy itself would function under duress. What followed was a profound transformation of American political ideology. For the first time, the federal government would intervene on an unprecedented scale in housing, employment, banking, and welfare. Roosevelt's election shattered the long-held belief that market forces should remain unregulated and that social welfare was outside the scope of federal responsibility. His presidency marked the dawn of modern American liberalism, where the state became a steward of economic stability and a guarantor of basic social protections. In this way, Roosevelt's rise did not just offer a new leader, it redefined the relationship between the American people and their government, creating a legacy that would shape the nation for generations to come. The New Deal was not a single program, but a sweeping series of legislative efforts and executive actions aimed at rescuing the United States from the depths of the Great Depression. It unfolded in two main waves: the first New Deal from 1933 to 1934, and the second New Deal from 1935 to 1936, each targeting different aspects of the crisis and reflecting an evolving strategy. The first New Deal focused on immediate economic recovery and restoring public confidence. One of Roosevelt's first moves was addressing the banking crisis. Just days after taking office, he declared a nationwide bank holiday, temporarily closing all banks to stop the panic-driven withdrawals. This was followed by the Emergency Banking Act, which allowed only solvent banks to reopen under federal supervision, restoring trust in the financial system. At the same time, the government created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, to insure individual bank accounts and prevent future bank runs. To combat skyrocketing unemployment, Roosevelt launched the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, a program that hired hundreds of thousands of young men to work on environmentally conservation projects, from planting trees to building parks. Another cornerstone was the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, which modernized one of the most impoverished regions in the country by constructing dams, generating electricity, and boosting agriculture and infrastructure. The second New Deal shifted focus from immediate recovery to long-term reform and social welfare. The Social Security Act of 1935 was one of its most enduring achievements, creating a safety net for the elderly, unemployed, and disabled through federal retirement pensions and unemployment insurance. The Wagner Act, or National Labor Relations Act, gave workers the right to unionize and bargain collectively, fundamentally transforming labor relations in America. Meanwhile, the Works Progress Administration, WPA, employed millions more in public works projects, including roads, bridges, schools, and even cultural programs supporting writers, artists, and musicians. Roosevelt's fireside chats were more than just speeches. They were a revolutionary way of building trust in government during a moment of national panic. At a time when Americans were lining up outside banks, losing jobs, and facing the collapse of the economy, the president's voice coming through the radio became a symbol of stability. These broadcasts bypassed the newspapers and political intermediaries, allowing FDR to speak directly to the American people in a tone that was calm, sincere, and deeply reassuring. He didn't use political jargon or abstract theory. Instead, he broke down complex issues into simple, relatable terms, often using metaphors and analogies that anyone could understand. The impact of this approach cannot be overstated. In an age before television and social media, radio was the most intimate medium available. Families would gather around their radios in living rooms across the country, and it felt as though the president was speaking directly to them, like a trusted neighbor, rather than a distant figure of authority. This personal touch helped to humanize Roosevelt's administration, making people feel included in the decisions being made at the highest levels of government. It gave Americans a sense of empowerment at a time when they otherwise felt helpless. Moreover, these chats helped solidify public support for controversial policies. When Roosevelt closed the banks or introduced sweeping government programs, people were more willing to accept these actions because they understood the reasoning behind them. It wasn't just policy, it was shared struggle, conveyed through a voice that had become a fixture in American homes. Roosevelt redefined presidential leadership by not only using power, but by shaping how that power was perceived. He demonstrated that effective leadership wasn't just about action, it was about connection. His communication style helped restore faith not only in the presidency but in democracy itself during one of its darkest chapters. Evaluating the success of the New Deal requires looking beyond its immediate programs to the deeper shifts it triggered in American society and governance. On one hand, the New Deal undeniably restored a shattered sense of national confidence. At a time when democracy itself seemed fragile, Roosevelt's sweeping actions, such as the Emergency Banking Act and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, reassured the public that the financial system could be trusted again. Tens of thousands found employment through the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, the Works Progress Administration, WPA, and other relief agencies, giving purpose and dignity to those cast aside by the Depression. Perhaps most enduringly, the Social Security Act of 1935 laid the foundation for a modern welfare state, providing unemployment insurance, old age pensions, and support for the disabled, a safety net that remains a core feature of American life today. However, these achievements were not without significant limitations. Despite massive spending and countless programs, unemployment remained stubbornly high well into the late 1930s, with nearly 10 million still jobless by 1939. Many of the jobs provided were temporary, and economic recovery remained uneven. Moreover, some programs, particularly those administered at the local level, reflected and even reinforced racial and gender inequalities. African Americans were often excluded from skilled jobs or given lower wages, and programs like the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, AAA, disproportionately hurt black sharecroppers in the South. Criticism came from both sides of the political spectrum. Conservatives feared Roosevelt was expanding federal power far beyond its constitutional limits, branding him a dangerous centralizer who was turning America towards socialism. Meanwhile, leftists and socialists argued the New Deal didn't go far enough, calling for greater wealth redistribution, nationalization of industries, and broader labor protections. They saw Roosevelt's reforms as stabilizing capitalism rather than transforming it. And then there's the enduring debate over causality. Did the New Deal actually end the Great Depression? Many historians argue that it was World War II, not the New Deal, that finally pulled America out of its economic freefall. The war effort mobilized industry, absorbed unemployment through mass enlistment, and generated a surge of federal spending unmatched by anything during Roosevelt's first 2 terms. In this view, the New Deal was more about managing the crisis than solving it, offering relief and reform, but not full recovery. Still, even if it didn't end the Depression, it redefined the role of government in American life, embedding the idea that the state had a responsibility to ensure basic economic stability, a legacy that would shape the nation long after the 1930s had passed. The New Deal's most profound and enduring impact was the transformation of the federal government's role in American life. Before Roosevelt, Washington was largely hands-off in matters of economic security and daily welfare. After the New Deal, it became accepted, if not expected, that the federal government should step in during times of crisis, regulate markets, and provide a social safety net for the vulnerable. Programs like Social Security, unemployment insurance, and labor protections weren't just temporary relief measures. They became permanent features of the American system, fundamentally reshaping the relationship between the citizen and the state. The New Deal was more than a set of emergency programs. It was a redefinition of the American social contract. For the first time, the federal government assumed responsibility not just for maintaining order or defending borders, but for actively managing the economy and safeguarding the well-being of its citizens. Roosevelt's belief that economic hardship could be addressed through state intervention became a radical departure from traditional laissez-faire attitudes. This shift opened the door for future generations to expect that in times of economic crisis, the government had both the authority and obligation to act decisively. This ideological foundation directly influenced landmark initiatives like Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, which expanded on New Deal principles by launching Medicare, Medicaid, and anti-poverty programs. These policies were not created in a vacuum. They were built on Roosevelt's idea that economic inequality and social injustice could be mitigated through federal action. In the decades that followed, this framework continued to guide liberal economic thinking, fueling debates over healthcare reform, social spending, and the regulatory powers of government agencies. However, the New Deal also forged sharp ideological lines that endure to this day. Conservatives viewed its expansion of government power as a dangerous overreach, fostering dependency and weakening individual enterprise. Libertarian and pro-market thinkers often cited as the origin of bloated bureaucracy and inefficiency. On the other hand, progressives and social democrats hail it as proof that well-designed government programs can uplift millions and reduce inequality. This division created a fundamental tension in American politics between those who see government as a problem and those who see it as a solution. That tension plays out in every modern debate, whether it's about healthcare reform, stimulus spending, or climate policy. The echoes of Roosevelt's choices continue to shape political discourse, voter expectations, and party platforms. In essence, the New Deal didn't just change the economy, it altered the philosophical foundations of American governance. It gave rise to the central question still asked today. In the pursuit of freedom and prosperity, what role should government play? The debate about the New Deal's effectiveness hinges on what criteria we use to judge its success. While many Americans and contemporary scholars regard the New Deal as a transformative period that reshaped American governance, there's no consensus on whether it truly ended the Great Depression. Economists who argue the New Deal didn't fully restore prosperity point to the continued high unemployment and the slow recovery of the economy throughout the 1930s. In their view, it was World War II's massive industrial demand, which required the United States to mobilize on an unprecedented scale, that pulled the economy out of its stagnation. Factories switched to war production, millions of jobs were created, and the unemployment rate dropped dramatically. For these economists, the New Deal's programs may have helped stabilize the economy, but it was the war effort that ended the Depression. However, this view overlooks the broader, more long-term effects of the New Deal. The argument from those who defend its legacy focuses on the systemic changes it brought about. The New Deal didn't merely aim to fix the immediate economic crisis. It reshaped the role of government in ways that would influence every aspect of American society for decades to come. Roosevelt's policies restored confidence in the American system at a time when the country faced an existential crisis. The rapid rise of fascism and communism across the globe presented a stark contrast to the democratic ideals of the United States. The New Deal ensured that, while economic hardship was ongoing, the nation could survive politically and socially intact. By providing direct relief to millions, creating long-term programs like Social Security, and reforming labor laws, the New Deal helped prevent the collapse of American democracy. Roosevelt's approach to government intervention, though controversial, demonstrated that the federal government could and should play an active role in protecting citizens from the worst excesses of capitalism. In this sense, the New Deal wasn't just a response to the Depression. It was a vision for what American society could look like in a more equitable, government-supported system. Beyond the immediate economic relief, the New Deal was essential in cultivating a new social contract. It established the idea that the government had an obligation to ensure basic security for its citizens, especially during times of crisis. This idea, though controversial, became ingrained in American political culture and laid the foundation for the modern welfare state. Thus, while the New Deal may not have ended the Great Depression in the immediate sense, its true success was in preventing a greater collapse of both the economy and the democratic system. It redefined the role of the federal government, making it an active force in ensuring economic stability and social welfare, something that continues to shape American policy to this day. There are also those who point to its exclusions and flaws. Racial discrimination embedded in some programs, unequal access to benefits, and the entrenchment of a powerful federal bureaucracy. Yet, even critics acknowledge that the New Deal redefined the relationship between the American people and their government. It set a precedent for federal responsibility in times of crisis, introduced the idea of social welfare as a civic right, and shaped decades of policymaking. In the end, perhaps the most honest conclusion is this. The New Deal may not have ended the Great Depression, but it forever changed what Americans expect from their government. Whether viewed as a bold rescue or a controversial overreach, its legacy is woven into the fabric of the nation. Do you think the New Deal saved America? Was it a true rescue or just a temporary fix? Comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like and subscribe for more in-depth history content. And don't miss our next video in the series, How WP Transformed the American Economy. Thanks for watching.